Hello and welcome to today's episode. If you're just starting to learn English, you might be wondering, where do I even begin? Should I start with vocabulary, grammar, or speaking practice? Learning a new language can feel overwhelming, but don't worry. Today, we're going to break it down into simple steps to help you start your English journey the right way. And to help us with that, I'm joined by Sarah, who has a lot of experience in language learning. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I'm so excited to talk about this because I know how confusing it can be when you first start learning a language. There are so many methods and resources out there, and sometimes you don't know what's best. But the good news is, learning English doesn't have to be complicated.
That's right. The key is to have a clear starting point. So, Sarah, if someone is an absolute beginner, what do you think is the first thing they should focus on?
Great question. If you're starting from zero, I'd say the best thing to do is build a basic vocabulary. Before worrying about grammar or pronunciation, just learn simple words that you'll actually use in everyday life. Things like greetings, numbers, common verbs, and essential nouns, things you would use in a basic conversation.
That makes a lot of sense. Without words, you can't communicate at all. So, how can beginners start learning vocabulary effectively? Should they just memorize word lists?
Memorizing lists can be helpful, but it's even better to learn words in context. For example, instead of just memorizing the word apple, try learning it in a sentence. I like apples. That way, you understand how to use it in real life. Flashcards can also be a great tool to help with memorization.
That's a great tip. Learning words in context helps you remember them better. But after building some basic vocabulary, what comes next? Should beginners start learning grammar right away?
Not necessarily. Grammar is important. But at the beginning, I think it's more useful to focus on simple sentence structures. Learn how to introduce yourself, ask basic questions, and say simple things like I am happy or I like coffee. These are the kinds of phrases that will help you start speaking quickly.
I love that approach, keeping it simple and practical. The goal is to start communicating, not to master every grammar rule immediately.
Exactly. People often get stuck because they try to learn too much grammar too soon. But the truth is, you don't need to know perfect grammar to start speaking. Just learning some basic sentence patterns can give you the confidence to have small conversations.
That's so true. So, we've covered vocabulary and basic sentences. What about listening? Should beginners start listening to English even if they don't understand much?
Yes, definitely. Even if you don't understand everything, listening helps you get used to the sounds of English. You can start with slow, clear English podcasts, simple stories, or even kid shows. The more you listen, the easier it will be to recognize words and understand pronunciation.
That's a great point. The more you expose yourself to English, the more familiar it becomes. It's like training your brain to recognize the language.
Exactly, and listening also helps with pronunciation. When you hear native speakers, you start to pick up on the natural rhythm and intonation of the language, which makes speaking easier later on.
That makes a lot of sense. So, to summarize, start with basic vocabulary, learn simple sentence structures, and listen to English as much as possible. These steps will help beginners build a strong foundation.
Yes, and the most important thing is to practice every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Small, consistent steps will lead to big progress over time.
That's such a great reminder, Sarah. I think a lot of people feel like they need to study for hours every day to make progress, but even just 10 minutes a day can really add up over time.
Exactly. The key is consistency. It's much better to study a little bit every day than to study for hours once a week, and then forget everything. Even if you only learn 5 new words a day, that's 150 words in a month.
That's a great way to think about it. Learning a language isn't about cramming, it's about steady progress. And speaking of progress, when should beginners start practicing speaking? Should they wait until they know more words and grammar?
No, not at all. I always encourage learners to start speaking as soon as possible, even if they only know a few words. You can start by repeating simple sentences out loud, practicing with a language partner, or even talking to yourself in English. The sooner you start using the language, the more confident you'll become.
That's such an important point. Many people are afraid to speak because they think they'll make mistakes, but mistakes are part of the learning process.
Exactly. No one speaks perfectly when they're just starting out, and that's okay. Think about how babies learn to talk. They don't wait until they know perfect grammar. They just start saying words, and over time, they improve. Learning English is the same.
I love that comparison. Learning a language should feel natural, not stressful. And another thing that helps is practicing with real-life situations. For example, if you go to a CAF, try ordering in English. Or if you're watching a movie, repeat a line out loud.
Yes, learning by doing is one of the best ways to improve. And if you don't have anyone to practice with, you can even try speaking in front of a mirror or recording yourself. It might feel strange at first, but it really helps with confidence.
That's a great tip. And speaking of practice, what about writing? Should beginners start writing in English early on? Or is that something they should focus on later?
I think writing is a great way to reinforce what you've learned. Even simple exercises, like writing a short diary entry or a text message in English, can help you remember new words and structures. You don't need to write long essays, just start small.
That makes sense. Writing helps you organize your thoughts and remember new vocabulary better. Plus, it gives you a chance to see your own progress over time.
Yes, and the more you write, the easier it becomes. You can start with simple sentences, then move on to short paragraphs, and eventually longer texts. The important thing is to use the language as much as possible in different ways: speaking, listening, writing, and even thinking in English.
That's a great point. Once you start thinking in English, it becomes a lot easier to speak and write naturally. And I think that's when learning starts to feel more natural instead of like a chore.
Exactly. The more you immerse yourself in English, the more comfortable you'll feel using it. It's all about surrounding yourself with the language in ways that feel fun and enjoyable.
That's such an important mindset. When you enjoy the process, it doesn't feel like studying, it feels like part of your daily life. And I think one of the best ways to make learning fun is by choosing topics that interest you.
Absolutely. If you love music, listen to English songs and try to understand the lyrics. If you like movies or TV shows, watch them with English subtitles. If you enjoy sports, read articles about your favorite teams in English. When you learn through things you already like, it feels much more natural.
That's such a great tip. A lot of people think studying has to be serious and structured. But in reality, you can learn a lot just by doing things you enjoy in English. And another thing that really helps is making English a habit.
Yes, small daily habits make a huge difference. For example, you can change your phone settings to English, follow English-speaking influencers on social media, or even try to think in English for a few minutes every day. These little habits help train your brain to get used to the language.
That's a great idea. Even something as simple as writing your grocery list in English or reading street signs can help. The more exposure you get, the easier it becomes to use English naturally.
Exactly, and another thing that helps is repetition. When you see or hear something multiple times, it sticks in your memory. So don't be afraid to repeat phrases, rewatch videos, or reread things until they start to feel familiar.
That's so true. Repetition is how we remember things, and the more we expose ourselves to English, the more natural it becomes. But what about people who struggle with motivation? How can they stay consistent when they feel stuck?
Great question. One thing that helps is setting small, clear goals. Instead of saying, "I want to be fluent," try setting a goal like, "I want to learn 10 new words this week," or "I will listen to 5 minutes of English every day." Small goals feel more achievable, and every time you reach one, it gives you a boost of confidence.
I love that. Big goals can feel overwhelming, but breaking them into smaller steps makes them much easier to reach. And celebrating progress, no matter how small, keeps you motivated to continue.
Exactly, and another thing that helps is having a study buddy. If you have a friend who's also learning English, you can motivate each other, practice together, and keep each other accountable. Even joining an online community can make learning more enjoyable.
That's a great idea. When you learn with others, it feels less like studying and more like a shared experience. And sometimes, just knowing that you're not alone in the process can make a big difference.
Yes, learning a language is a journey, and it's okay to have ups and downs. The most important thing is to keep going, even on the days when it feels difficult. Every bit of effort you put in brings you one step closer to your goal.
That's such a great mindset, Sarah. Learning a language isn't about being perfect, it's about making progress little by little. And sometimes, People don't realize how much they've improved because they're focused on what they don't know yet.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to look back and see how far you've come. Maybe a few months ago, you didn't understand a single English sentence, but now you can recognize words and phrases. Maybe before, you were afraid to speak, but now you can introduce yourself. Those are huge achievements.
That's a great reminder. Sometimes we're so focused on fluency that we forget to appreciate the small victories, and those small wins add up over time.
Yes, and another thing that helps is reviewing old materials. If you've been learning for a while, go back to the first things you studied. You'll probably realize that they feel much easier now, and that's proof that you're improving.
That's a great idea. Revisiting old lessons can really boost confidence because you can see how much you've grown. And speaking of confidence, I think a lot of learners struggle with fear, especially the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, definite, Ali. Fear of mistakes holds so many people back. But the truth is, mistakes are part of learning. No one speaks perfectly from the beginning, and even native speakers make mistakes. The most important thing is to communicate.
That's such a good point. If you can make yourself understood, that's already a success. And most people won't even care if you make a few mistakes, they'll appreciate the effort.
Yes, and actually, making mistakes helps you learn. If you say something wrong and someone corrects you, you're more likely to remember it next time. So instead of being afraid of mistakes, think of them as stepping stones to improvement.
That's such a great way to look at it. The more you practice, the more natural English will feel. And eventually, speaking will become second nature.
Exactly, and that's why consistency is so important. The more you use English, whether it's speaking, listening, reading, or writing, the more comfortable you'll become. It's all about daily practice, even if it's just a little bit at a time.
That's a great reminder. Learning English isn't about speed, it's about consistency. And the most important thing is to just keep going, no matter what.
That's right. Language learning is a long-term journey, and it's okay to go at your own pace. Some days you'll feel like you're making great progress, and other days you might feel stuck. But as long as you keep going, you're moving forward. I love that analogy. And just like a tree needs sunlight and water, your brain needs regular exposure to English. That's why surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible is so important.
Exactly. And I think one of the best ways to stay motivated is to make learning personal. For example, if someone loves cooking, they can watch English recipe videos. If they enjoy traveling, they can learn phrases for ordering food or asking for directions.
That's such a great idea. When learning feels connected to your life, it becomes more meaningful. And when something is meaningful, you're more likely to stick with it.
Yes. And another thing that helps is setting rewards for yourself. If you reach a small goal, like learning 50 new words or completing a full conversation in English, you can treat yourself to something nice. It makes the process more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Rewards can be really motivating. Even something as simple as watching your favorite show in English after a study session can make learning feel more exciting.
That's a great strategy. And I think the key takeaway from all of this is that learning English doesn't have to be stressful. It can be fun, natural, and part of your everyday life.
Yes, the more you enjoy the process, the easier it becomes. And before you know it, you'll realize how much progress you've made without even thinking about it.
That's so true. When learning feels fun, it doesn't feel like studying, it just becomes part of your daily routine. And I think another thing that really helps is having a reason to learn. When you have a clear purpose, like getting a better job, traveling, or making new friends, it keeps you motivated.
Exactly. Having a personal reason makes learning feel more meaningful. If you know why you're learning, you'll be more likely to stick with it, even when it gets challenging.
Right. And speaking of challenges, I think another common struggle is feeling frustrated when progress feels slow. Some people start strong, but then lose motivation because they don't see results fast enough.
That's a really common problem. But the thing is, progress isn't always obvious. Sometimes you don't realize how much you've improved until you look back. Maybe a few months ago, you couldn't understand a single sentence, but now you can follow a simple conversation. That's real progress.
Yes, and I think that's why it's helpful to track your learning. Maybe keep a small journal where you write down new words, or record yourself speaking every few weeks. When you compare it to where you started, you'll see how far you've come.
That's a great idea. keeping a record of your learning can be really motivating. And even small improvements matter. Every word you learn, every sentence you understand, it all adds up over time.
Absolutely. And another thing that helps is focusing on what you can do instead of what you can't do yet. A lot of learners get stuck because they feel like they're not good enough, but in reality, they've already made progress.
Yes, it's so easy to compare yourself to others or to native speakers and feel discouraged. But everyone learns at their own pace, and even knowing a few words is better than knowing nothing at all.
That's such a great point. Instead of thinking, I still make mistakes, think, I can already have a basic conversation. That positive mindset makes a huge difference.
Exactly, confidence is key. If you believe in yourself and keep practicing, you will get better. It's just a matter of time and consistency.
That's such an important reminder, Sarah. Learning a language isn't about perfection, it's about progress. The more you practice, the more confident you become, and confidence makes a huge difference in how you use English in real life.
Absolutely, confidence is what helps you actually use the language instead of just studying it. A lot of people know more than they think, but they're too afraid of making mistakes. If you just go for it and try, you'll realize that people understand you, even if your grammar isn't perfect.
That's so true. I think a lot of people worry that native speakers will judge them, but in reality, most people appreciate the effort. They don't expect learners to speak perfectly, they just appreciate communication.
Yes, and most of the time, native speakers are happy to help. They might even be impressed that you're learning their language. So instead of being afraid, think of every conversation as practice. The more you use English, the better you'll get.
That's a great mindset. And I think another way to boost confidence is by preparing for common situations. For example, if you're traveling, practice simple phrases for ordering food, asking for directions, or checking into a hotel. That way, you feel ready when the moment comes.
That's such a good tip. If you already know what to say in different situations, you'll feel less nervous. And even if the conversation doesn't go exactly as planned, at least you'll have something to start with.
Exactly. And another thing that helps is learning chunks of language instead of individual words. Instead of just memorizing thank and you separately, learn the full phrase, thank you so much, or I really appreciate it. That way, you can use phrases naturally without thinking too much about grammar.
Yes, that's one of the fastest ways to sound more fluent. Learning full phrases makes speaking easier because you're not trying to build sentences word by word. You're just using expressions that native speakers already use.
That's a game changer for a lot of learners. And it's also a great way to sound more natural because you're learning real-life English, not just textbook grammar.
Exactly. And the best way to learn natural English is by listening to real conversations, podcasts, interviews, YouTube videos, or even just chatting with native speakers. The more you listen, the more you pick up on how people actually speak.
That's such an important point. A lot of learners focus only on grammar, but listening is just as important. When you listen a lot, you start to recognize common patterns and phrases without even realizing it.
Yes, and that makes speaking much easier. When you've heard a phrase many times, it feels natural to use it yourself. That's why immersion, surrounding yourself with English as much as possible, is one of the best ways to learn.
That's so true. The more English you hear, the more comfortable you'll feel using it. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You can start by listening to something simple every day, even if it's just a few minutes.
Exactly. Even just a few minutes of listening every day can make a huge difference. The key is consistency. If you make English a part of your daily life, you'll improve naturally over time.
That's such a great point. Learning English doesn't have to be overwhelming. Small daily habits, like listening to a podcast, watching a short video, or even reading a few sentences in English, can lead to big improvements.
Yes, and most importantly, enjoy the process. If you're having fun, you'll stay motivated. Learning a language is a journey, and every step you take brings you closer to fluency.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, just keep going. No matter where you are in your learning journey, remember that progress takes time and every effort counts. Stay consistent, stay confident, and most importantly, enjoy the process.
Yes, you've got this. Keep learning, keep practicing, and soon you'll see just how much you've improved.
That's a perfect way to end today's discussion. Thanks so much, Sarah, for sharing all these great tips.
Thank you. It was great talking about this. I hope our listeners feel more inspired to start or continue their English learning journey.
Bye.
Bye.